Now, the book of Leviticus is, the name Leviticus, the oldest name for the book, is the law of the priests. The book describes the functions of the priesthood and the duties of the priestly nation. The first half of the book deals with sacrifice and the laws that safeguard the priestly character of Israel. And the other half with holiness and sanctification of human life. So tonight's class is going to be emphasizing two words, two things: sacrifice and holiness. Now, if we looked at the New Testament, we would see we emphasize the sacrifice of Jesus, but we tend not to emphasize any sacrifice from us. It's kind of like, well, I don't have to make a sacrifice. I can really do what's right in my own eyes. And in Judaism, you never did what was right in your eyes. You were to do what was right in God's eyes. And we're going to find out the extreme importance of these two words, sacrifice and holy, or holiness. The burnt offering, which is a sacrifice, which was made by most of the people in the pagan world as well as the Judaism, expressed the individual's self-surrender to God's will. Now, in the ancient religious world, aside from Judaism, it was just a system. It's like you went in, you paid your dues, you went out, the gods said you were better. But the spiritual level of what's going on in Judaism is light years different than the sacrifices made in those pagan temples. The purpose of the sacrifice is not to appease God, but to change our life. In other words, God doesn't need it, we need it. It's to develop our faith. The burnt offering expressed the individual's self-surrender to God's will. The peace offering, gratitude for his bounties and his mercies. The sin offering, sorrow at having erred from the way of God, and the firm resolve to be reconciled with him. So maybe you, Noah, could write those three words on the board. I think there's a pen over there. Now there's other sacrifices, but these are the three main ones. The burnt offering. And again, like this other book, it tells you exactly how to do it. Very prescribed, very spelled out, very detailed of how to do it. And why you're doing it. The peace offering and the sin offering. Tonight, in terms of taking a look at this perspective in our own lives and applying that perspective, it has something to do with sacrifice that we may not understand. For example, if I sin against my husband, I might say, I've sinned against you, please forgive me. But do I make a sacrifice that empowers that forgiveness? Or do I just, use the words, but an hour later I'm mad again? So a sacrifice, let's suppose you sacrificed your right to be angry. You sacrificed your right to judge that person. You sacrificed your right to always be right. So the word sacrifice is important in the Christian world, but it's not very well developed. And thus that's the reason we decided to do Leviticus, because we have to look at this. These were things that God asked for. Now, in terms of the animal sacrifices, if the person was very poor, their sacrifice could just be some meal, something very small, very, very tiny sacrifice. It wasn't how much you spent on the sacrifice. It had nothing to do with how much the sacrifice cost you. It had to do with your attitude. It had to do with your humility, your brokenness, and your genuineness. So no one requires you to do a burnt offering. But in the New Testament, we are told that we are to surrender our will to God's will. That's our burnt offering. We are to surrender to God's will. Now, one of the things that we tend to do as Christians, we tend to say, well, I really don't know what God wants. This just fries me. I get livid because I hear this all the time. Well, I just don't know what God wants, which means I'm trying to manipulate him to get what I want. And it's not cool, because what God wants is us to love our neighbors ourselves, to love him, to put him first, not your children first, not yourself first, but to put him first. And it's not confusing what he wants, but we want to say, well, should we take this road or this road? And we want him to tell him, we want him to tell us which road we should take. Well, that would be nice, wouldn't it? Then you would always win. It was like which number is going to win at the gambling casino. And we like to know so that we can spell it out. And one of the reasons these things are so spelled out is God knew that these people knew nothing except paganism. And they really knew nothing. So they were spelling things out in ways that primitive man could understand. And you might say, well, why animal sacrifice? And that goes back to Genesis, of course, in the garden. But it also goes back to the fact that they didn't have money. When they were in the Sinai, you couldn't make a financial sacrifice. The only thing you could sacrifice was your animals. And later, the common man had little money. And what money he had, he used to take an animal from his own herd. Later, during the time of Jesus, it didn't work that way. The temple authorities held all the sacred animals, and you had to buy the right animal, and that's why their coffers got bigger and bigger and richer, because they were cheating the little people. You could not make any sacrifice that was not sold to you by the temple. And you could not even use your money. You would have to buy temple money. So the money changers were selling you the temple money, and then you used the temple money to buy the sacrifice, and so this was a double dip to financially corrupt the priesthood. God's intention and the intention of Leviticus and the intention all the way through the development of this story is, yes, you don't have anything, but I know what it costs you to sacrifice your animals. And the sacrifice was to be eaten. There were times when there were parts that were not to be eaten. The Jews were never to eat blood. They were never to eat fat. But, generally, the meat was not wasted. It was not just, well, I'll sacrifice it now, I'll waste it. It was to be eaten by the temple priests. It was food for them and for the people who were helping them.